something about the selection and how it came about. I think that's the lovely thing when we decide on a subject, is that it actually allows me time to start going through everything and thinking, well, actually, what do I think is filled with life, that we can use in some kind of way. And I started with cycling, because that's what I was interested in, and I was reading that. And I want to tell you that my friend Shraga Bar-On, who sits here in the Mahon, the reason we have an English translation is because of a wonderful, wonderful article that he wrote about thirst. That's going to be coming out in the Mahon's publication. There was a book that came out a few years ago in the Mahon called On Faith. Very big book. Now they've translated the book into English, but they've chosen a few new articles that didn't appear in the Hebrew original. And one of them is Shraga's article on cycling. So I just want to tell you, first of all, it's outstanding, and it has large pieces of the piece itself. So you're really going to enjoy it. It's going to be called On Faith, I think. So when I started kind of thinking, what's the cocktail that I want to make? Like, what kind of taste is it going to have? Cycling was the centerpiece, but then I said, what if I do cycling? And I wanted to do Pisetzna. Well, I'm going to do Rabbinical. I said, oh, actually, it's all because of Baal Shem Tov. So, mamash, I want to say that it was a very interesting thing that I went the other way, and I started from these big reformers of Hasidut, or the big neo-Hasids, of the first neo-Hasids of the beginning of the 20th century, and then I had to backtrack. So, באמת חשוב לי to say that I think that if the Baal Shem Tov did not exist, I'm not sure, as I said, I'm not sure I would be Jewish. I'm not sure that without that ability that new sensibility about religion, about the inner life, about the spirit, about turning the divine drama into something that happens inside of us, right? BT, my friend, is teaching here in Elective, which is really about a lot of aspects of Hasidut, but Zot HaTorah Adam, to say the big Torah is the human being, that's something so profound that it doesn't matter which text I looked at that come from the most remote parts of anything that was touched by Hasidut. They have that basic sensibility in them, which is the one that says, Mellow kol haaretz kvodo, ואין דבר גדול או קטן נפרד ממנו, כי הוא המצוי בכל המציאות כולה. נכון? So suddenly, it's not, I think, I just want to say my huge kavod for somebody who could formulate in such a short version, and a very Baal Peh version that we have here on page number 2, source number 3, to say, therefore, it's not something that's relegated. Faith, God, isn't something that you go to the synagogue for, or that you go to this person for only. No. You can practice presence, eating, drinking, having sex, doing business, hanging around with your friends. That's suddenly, all that turns into opportunities of experiencing or sensing the presence of the divine. That's a new world. It's a new world. So and no wonder that it became a movement. and no wonder that you have people. I remember in the first neo-Hasidic conference that was in New York, maybe 15 years ago, to say, yes, of course, that's what's going to be revived again and again. It goes through, it goes down, the Hasidic movement itself falls asleep, and then you have people that pick up on this initial take, but it demands a new sense of what God is all about. It's not just about what is faith. The talking, the kind of engaging with the question of faith has to do with but who are we talking about? Who are we talking about that we engage in faith? And that's something that I want to go back to, but I just wanted to start with that. And before we go to Rabbi Nachman, I wanted to backtrack. And I wanted to say a few etymological kind of notes that I think are going to be very interesting. Maybe some of them you have done, but I think they'll still be interesting. You know that when we go back to Tanakh, the word emunah isn't really about a statement about reality, but it comes mostly in the meaning of yosher, ne'emanut, emet, right? Integrity, trustworthy, faithfulness, but faithfulness from the point of view of something you can trust, like what we call ha'emunah va'bitachon, the bitachon. It's something that's one meaning that it has in many verses, and it's also about giving trust in something. And I think another meaning that we have in Tanakh is stability. Is davar ne'eman is trustworthy and faithful because it's steady. And I mean, that's what you'll find if you go through like the regular etymological takes on it. But I mean, here comes the fun of that I get to show books that I think are really interesting. There's a book that I'm reading now by a very, very special Kabbalah scholar, poet, artist, writer, and that's Chaviva Pdaya, who's a professor of Kabbalah in the University in Be'er Sheva. The name of the book is Merchav Umakom. Chaviva, H-A-V-I-V-A, Pdaya, P-E-D-A-Y-A. It's not in English, and it's very difficult to read in Hebrew, and it's called Masa al Lo Muda HaTeologi Politi, a mass essay on the subconscious, the theological political subconscious. And if it's difficult as a heading, it's nothing when it compares to what you have to read. Aval. In it is an amazing chapter about faith. And from this chapter, I just want to glean a pearl that I found was so amazing. Chaviva says that, you know, when you go back into the very archaic levels of the Hebrew language, you find that verbs that have to do with very sensual, real actions in the real world, you can trace the way they move from the real to the symbolic and to the abstract, okay? And she picks out three. She takes kapara, she takes tahara, kapara, emunah. So she says, look, you know, if you look at the verses in Torah, you see tahara is to wash. The activity, the mundane activity, the physical embodied activity is to wash. And then it becomes, right, it moves into another level of language and cultural consciousness when it turns into being purification, tahara. And then she does the same thing with kapara, which is covering, like Moses's little teva, right? And what happens to kapara? But the one that interested me is emunah. And she shows that one of the meanings of emunah in Torah is actually the idea or the action which the mother or the caring parent does with a baby, which is omna, which is carrying, holding, handling, and I think that, so first of all, that's where it is. It's the pulat chanicha. It's that activity that is so basic in humanity and parenting, of caring and supporting, and it's the very maternal first kind of activities. And the verse that has in it, in a wonderful way, all of these together, is the verse in Deuteronomy, in Bamidbar Yud Aleph Yud Bet, where in Bamidbar Yud Aleph Yud Bet, where Moses says, when God gets pissed off, as he generally tends to get in those chapters, Moshe says, "Ha'anochi hariti et kol ha'am hazeh. Im anochi yeliditi hu. Ki tomar elai sa'ehu bechikcha kasher yisa ha'omen et hayonek al adama." Right? He says, did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? That you say to me, carry them that I'll carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant? Nachon? And I'm supposed to carry them to the promised land. So Bemet, it has in it that omna. And when that term, when that maternal activity turns into being something in the symbolic order, it kind of transfers into that thing which we both carry and hold as dear to us, and it's also something that supports and holds us, right? Emunah has that double take, and she goes on into this kind of wonderfully wild midrash that the word itself, Emunah, has in it has in it mother, and it has in it Ema, it has in it the fearfulness of not being held, and it has in it the im, will there be the presence? But, that's more for the rest of it. What she does show, which I think is very interesting, that in intensive groups, in communitas groups, in religions, you do have this quest for this more maternal sense of emunah than the one that speaks about like credos, ideas that you have to uphold, that you have to believe in or not believe in. I totally recommend that chapter, and it's also readable, that chapter in this book, which is amazing. And I hope it comes out in English, because I think it's very, very outstanding. So I'm carrying that with me, this idea, can we look at this whole question of emunah as something that we carry and that we have to nurture? That's where I want to go from Chaviva. That emunah isn't, like Zelda says, it's not there lying in a box. So what are the practices that we do that emunah stays enhanced, vivid, alive? How do we notice when it's, kind of falling asleep or being filled with dust, or there's nothing renewed in it? And I think those are the, that's why I wanted to bring it. But I also want to say that being a person who does not live in the beginning of the 19th century, like Rabbi Nachman, for example, I found it very inspiring to see language that speaks about faith and belief, not in the Mount Sinai talk, not in the big talk, not that belief has to do with very grand earthquakey kind of experiences, shattering, oceanic. No, like it could be those tiny things. And that's why I want to read with you for a second on page number 2, source number 4, a poem written by Hamutal Bar Yosef, who's a professor of literature, and wrote a book about a lot about the mystical aspects in Israeli poetry and where they come from, and about Russian influences on Hebrew literature of the 20th century. And she was with us in the Mahon for quite a while, and she's a wonderful person. And when I saw this, I just emailed her and I said, Hamutal, I would love to teach this. So sorry that it's just my translation with my friend Ruchi Sofia helped me. So let me just read it. ברגעים שאני מאמינה באלוהים, אני רואה אותו דואה על האוויר החם, בלובן פרפרים שזה עתה בקעו מגולמיהם, ובאותו היום חתונתם וגם מותם. או שאני רואה אותו בתוך כדור סביון תפוח, ואני יושבת על המדרגות החמימות, ורוח מפריחה פתאום את זרעוניו, כמו שלג רך, ובחיקי נשר זרעון אחד, ושם הוא נח. That's a nice music at the end, right? The rhythm is very nice. So I just thought it's so beautiful that somebody writes, it's, you know, it's not big moments. In those moments, first of all, it's just moments that she believes. But in those moments here in Israel and Yerushalayim, when I believe in God, you know, there he is gliding on the wind, in the whiteness of those butterflies, in that seed from the dandelion puff. And what I just want to have us carry with us is the idea that it's all very fragile, it's all very transient. It's not at all the sense of emunah, like bitachon, like yated ne'eman, you know, that's the name of the Haredi newspaper. What does it mean? Yated ne'eman is ne'eman, it doesn't move. Actually, everything that she describes in the sense of that moments of regaim shani ma'amina, it's that warm wind wafting through. It's that one seed that may be all potentiality, but it's so fragile. It's a totally fragile sense that you can't really store or hoard or, like, you know, just knock it into a box. No, that's how it could be. And actually, I think there's a lot of idud. It's encouragement, because it's talking in such minor language. Yeah, it's so undramatic. It's not dramatic. So I wanted to bring her because I want to keep us in the balance between these kind of shattering Zeitlin language and the language that we might use, which is this poetic, very 21st century language. So here we are with Rabbi Nachman. And I know that many of you have read this. I hope many of you have taught this text. If you haven't, please do, in as many environments as you can. But what I want to say about Umoshe nigash el ha'arafel asher sham ha'elohim, asher sham ha'elohim. Yeah, that's what he kind of riffs on. I want to say a few things about this text. I hope you all had a chance to read that one, right? You all got to that one. So what I'm thinking about is that Rabbi Nachman is actually saying, let's make a new set of questions around faith. Let's figure out what are our premises, bichlal, about where we're looking for the presence of divinity, you know, and let me start you off by the most difficult one. And what I'm thinking about it is that, first of all, it's very contemporary. It's very contemporary. I mean, most people I know think exactly like what Rabbi Nachman is describing here. That is, that we think, oh, there's a hindrance. If I want to have a rich spiritual life, if I want to find God, if I want to secure my faith and my sense of faith, I have to either find a way to detour this hindrance, I have to find a way to fly over it, I have to find a kind of bomb that's going to shatter it, but it clearly has nothing to do with the hindrance itself. So first of all, I think that very subtle psychological spiritual intuition that Rabbi Nachman is so good at, to say, no, you know, even though it's done in this very complicated thing, because of Midat Adin, God has to place the hindrance, because we deserve, Magia lanu, we deserve the hindrance, and you can't, it would be unjust. You know, it would be unjust if we didn't have hindrances, if we've really not paid attention to our spiritual life and we suddenly want to go all, you know, we want to be in the clarity of the light. So to say, God has to put in from Midat Adin, you have to have a hindrance. But that God loves you more than justice. And first of all, bichlal, to say that if Rabbi Nachman wants to weigh them against the other, that tzedek as a divine attribute. And the love, he wants, Yagolu rachamecha al midotecha. He wants to say that the sense of ahava is more than the sense of judgment, and therefore God hides God's self in the mini'ah itself. So the invitation to say, go search, don't try immediately to just go another way. Stay with the hindrance until the hindrance itself starts revealing the contours of that which you are searching for, is outstanding. And also, I want to say another thing. You know, in many of Rabbi Nachman's Likutim, in the Likutei Torot, a lot of time he makes a very clear differentiation between the tzaddik, that's him of course, and us, who are the kahal, the am. You know, it's very famous in the very famous Torah about faith and lack of faith, which is the halal hapanui, the empty void, where he says there's two ways of approaching these questions. One is for the select few who are daring and special and can handle the intensity of a place that seems to be devoid of any divinity, or that real place that doesn't have God in it, or seems not to have God in it. And the people. For people, they can't handle it. So just tell them to do such and such, and let the tzaddikim go dangle their feet in the empty void, okay? Because they can sit there playing on their guitars. But, which really pisses me off when I read Rabbi Nachman, but what's very interesting in this Torah is that on the biblical verses that he's riffing off, there is a differentiation, nachon? The people in Ma'amad Har Sinai, that's us, move back and say, we're gonna die. We can't handle this. We can't deal with this. Nachon? And therefore we cannot proceed in our maybe desire to know God. We can't, so they back off. Nachon? And Rabbi Nachman says, but look at Moshe. Moshe ניגש אל הערפל, נכון? משה ניגש אל הערפל, אשר שם האלוהים. So, because of the way he structures the Torah, that he says some people, when they have a desire to kind of venture on their spiritual voyage, they should know these things. So first of all, I found it complimentary to Rabbi Nachman that here, actually we are invited to be like Moshe. He's not totally making the differentiation that only Mosheim can do that, which means only the tzaddikim. But it actually means all of us with our hindrances, and bichlal, I think that's the way to read Rabbi Nachman, is to switch his language about tzaddikim and say, well, maybe we can call ourselves something different, but we want to be in that quest, to say, yeah, we're supposed to have Be'etzem Moshe as an ideal here of saying, do enter into it. And another point that I want to make about faith in the cloud or faith in the fog, and I've said it in quite a few opportunities, I want to say something about peace work in the Middle East. That the reason that this is my kind of tzitzit text in many ways is because what I've learned, and I think what many people that want to do peace work in the Middle East, and we have a few wonderful people like that sitting right here with us in this room, is that you can't do maybe what you could do in America and say, when the fog settles, let's get to work. You know, when the messiness clears up, let's get to work. There's so much work to do. But it's actually a full targil of working in the fog. It's totally working in the fog. You have no idea what's going to be canceled, who's going to arrive, what's going to be closed off. You have like no idea. And this has been my experience in working in Sulcha for the last 12 years, is that that's the way it works. You have to move into a mindset that says, I am willing to place my faith in working in the fog and not imagining what's going to, you know, the sun that's going to rise after you get through it to the other side. And I'm sure that even though that sounds dramatic and very Middle Eastern-y, I think that's very true to a lot of us. Klamar, that a lot of the work that we do is work in the Arafel, but it suddenly gives it such sacred dimension say, yeah, that's a sacred realm to be operating in. Those were the reasons that I felt it's really important that he suddenly switches the location. He switches the whole premise of differentiating between the sacred places and that's where you find the faith, and the places that don't even think of it, because that's not where you're going to find it. And by the way, that's something that Rabbi Nachman repeats and repeats and repeats in so many ways in his Torot and in his Masiot and in his stories. We might get to another Rabbi Nachman, but I want to jump now to our central text, which is Zeitlin, okay? So let me say a few things, and let me go through a few pieces of this that I have found to be the first thing I want to say is that in September, Art Green is having a book of his that is coming out in Paulist Press. I think it's coming September, and it's called Hasidic Spirituality for a New Era, the Religious Writings of Hillel Zeitlin. Okay? And he did it with Joel Rosenberg, and I've seen it, and it's quite amazing. But I emailed him, and I said, did you do Thirst? And he said, whoa, that's a bit above everything. So he said he didn't dare kind of translate it, but I thought he took very, very wonderful pieces, especially out of Sifran Shel Yechidim of Zeitlin. And I do recommend, because I think it's a big deal that now you will have extant in English Zeitlin, because there isn't. So I want to say something about Tzimaon. First of all, we're speaking about Hillel Zeitlin during this time, just before the First World War, okay? We're talking about Zeitlin after his most dramatic years. He comes from a very Hasidic background, very mystical, I would say ecstatic early childhood that he writes about himself in his short biography. And then he describes the years of his adolescence, where he's totally enthralled, with Schopenhauer and Nietzsche and his Lev Shestov. He's totally not interested in all this Jewish stuff anymore. It seems to him obsolete. It's irrelevant. There's a new message, there's a new language, there's a new passion, and he finds it in these big heretics, okay? He finds them to be the real God seekers. And he's totally, he kind of leaves mitzvot and Torah, and he starts seeking through them. And then, or this is the way that in the linear kind of spiritual biography, it's tended to be portrayed. Then after the Kishinev and the big pogrom of 1903 and 1905, he starts this huge quest of finding a way back, like picking up the Jewish idiom, looking for the God search in the inside language of Judaism, but he's always carrying with him everything that he learned, okay? It's not that he drops them off. So, those are the years that people say that you could come to visit Zeitlin on one Shabbos and he'd be wearing a gartel and the whole kapota and thing, and you could come the next Shabbat and he'd be opening the door with a cigar in his mouth. And he was a very wild guy. We're talking about somebody who's totally involved in the intellectual life of Warsaw. He writes in all the newspapers. He writes in the Zionist and in the non-Zionist press. He writes incredible things about the Zohar. He's the first one to write really a great essay about Chabad. He's the first one to really write an essay looking as an overview about Rabbi Nachman. He's the first one to write a big essay on the Shekhinah. And remember, talking about the beginning of the 20th century in this language that actually speaks to us, because it's not just Shlomei Emunei Israel. He's not only talking the inside language. He's been out there. He's met the other languages. And that's why there's something so appealing about reading him. So what I want to say about Zeitlin, who's writing this, is that actually it allows us to peek in to the different stations in his own spiritual biography, נכון? And there is no question that he sees himself in this language called the God-thirsty, the God-seekers. Yeah, the God-seeker. The names of this essay or this story or this fantasy, נכון? There are three names that were given to it when it came out in Hasifrut. One was Hatzimaon, and when you say Tzimaon, that's clearly a midrash, נכון? צמאה נפשי לאלוהים, לאל חי, מתי יבוא וראה, כאייל תהרוג על אפיקי מים, כנפשי תהרוג אליך. It's thirst as a central metaphor for the quest for God or the quest for faith. But he gave it also another name, which is Chazon Lev. איזה יופי של שם, Chazon Lev. It's a heart vision, it's a vision of the heart, which is also something very important for Zeitlin, who's very into renewing the passionate, prophetic, poetic language in Judaism. And he's saying, I want to talk about a heart meditation, the meditation of my heart, or the vision that's internalized, yeah? This is a journey that I'm describing as if it's happening outside, but it's a Chazon Lev. And that's also very state-of-the-art in certain romantic Russian, Polish style of writers, philosophers, mystics of the time. And then there's another name that was given to it in Michtav Me'echad HaTo'im with Taf, which means a letter from one of the perplexed, which is one of those that are wandering, unable to find an answer, right? So Rambam did one. He also has one. This is a letter from himself, who is one of the Tu'im in these paths of faith, but it's also for all of us who are Tu'im in the paths of faith. So that's what I wanted to say from the point of view of framing it. So let's look at a few aspects of Tzimaon. First of all, I want to offer it for all of you, whether you're going to be doing it with youth or you're going to be doing it with adults. This is a great text because, and maybe this is the reason that I love Zohar so much, it's the same reason, that instead of ideas and religious, spiritual speculations or philosophical or metaphysical speculations staying in the abstract, there's something wonderful when they're placed in a story. Because suddenly, I don't even know how, everybody gets it. You know, if you had to read Shemtov or you had to read Nietzsche here and he'd quote it in the quote, we'd be in a totally different atmosphere. But his choice to turn it into this voyage where you could actually make like a cartoon of this, right? You could make a story. Somebody here said, right, that was wonderful. You could put the pictures in of who are these people that you meet along the way? This dark, curly, beautiful, Dionysian, Nietzschean, hedonistic guy. Like, I see him all the time with all these Art Nouveau girls dancing around. Mamash, this is really a literature of its time. But to meet that youth saying, just forget it, you know, he's dead. It's not that I don't have kavod. I have kavod to Brahma and to Zeus and to everybody else, but en malasot, it's gamarnu. We're done with that. That age is gone. Okay? So Nachon, he starts with that. And also, I thought it's very interesting that he doesn't turn him into this horrible, you know, the atheist isn't like somebody said, how wonderful in the Haggadah of Noam Tzion. How would we present Nagid Rasha? The Ben Arasha, he doesn't do it that way. He actually does something very enticing. It's this beautiful, romantic, youth that comes out of all the art that we know. And that's what he says. And then, so that's the first encounter. And then when he comes to the second one, who's a much less attractive, bold, old, thin, skeletal kind of guy, Nachon, who presents really the scientific positivist point of view. Nachon? God died under the scientist's scalpel. Zeo, ma lasot. We cannot, I don't know what was presented like on the first day, but because we cannot reconcile faith and the imaginative world of religion with science and with our progress-oriented, objectivist, positivistic science, therefore he's dead. He died on that shulchan nituchim, on the operating table, because we have the language and religion doesn't fit into that category, and therefore he's dead. Now, Nachon, the third one, is a very interesting one, and I just want to say something about it, right? It's the poet. And the poet says, like, why are you wasting your time? You know, hew for yourself. Psolecha, shnei luchot avanim. Psolecha, Elohim, make for yourself a God. Now, it can sound ridiculous, but actually, it is a wonderful homage to the human genius spirit that says, well, you know, don't forget, actually, we invent the gods. We invent God, or we invent the language which we have as adorning some kind of concept that we have about the divine. We actually are the ones that make up different language in every generation. But here, you know, there's something very ironic, almost sarcastic, where he says, you don't like the God you made? Trash him, right? He says, it doesn't matter. You can come up with a God sevenfold more beautiful, more dazzling, because it's actually just our human zeh, okay? And here we have our wanderer wandering along. And then he comes to the fourth one. I was sitting with a chivruta out here really saying, isn't it interesting that Zeitlin doesn't give a name to the fourth one? Achshav, I wanted to say something about it, because first of all, you know, I don't want to take how many hands, but many of us, this is our God. For many, bemet. Maybe it's not in this language exactly. We do it Blake, we do it Heschel, we do it Rabbi Nachman, we do it. But this language that says, Lama tevakesh et haElohim michutz lecha, v'halo haElohim becha. במרוץ דמך, בדפיקת לבך, בכל תנועה ותנועה, בכל רגש קל, בכל זעזוע, בכל מחשבה גדולה וקטנה, בכל דמיון וחיזיון, בכל אשר תפנה, בכל אשר תראה, תשמע, תהגה, בכל כוכב, בכל פרח, בכל שערה, בכל מנוחה. נכון, it's very tightly. I read it to my husband, he said, they didn't have erasers in that time? No, but it's like, that's very tightly. It's very passionate. It's kind of overflowing language all the time. But he says, בכל פרח, בכל שערה, בכל מנוחה, בכל קול ודממה, בהררי אל, בגרגרי חול, right? In a grain of sand, in a wild flower. See, right? That's the invitation. בענק, באש, בממשות היותר רבה, ברוח הדק, בכל תראה את אלוהיך, כי הוא הכל, right? So I was wondering, like, who is this guy? On the one hand, this is Hasidut. You know, this is also not a guy that says God is dead. Ma pitom. For this guy, the question isn't if God is dead. God is clearly not dead because God is the all. The question is, how is he pointing out to our perplexed wanderer where to go, right? I think this was the first class that Art Green taught us, right? That Hasidut has this great idea that instead of pointing up, you point inside. Like, where are you looking? Where is the search? No one is pointing this way. But it's very interesting that he doesn't. It might be the Rav Kook kind of guy. Rav Kook, that's exactly this kind of pantheistic language of this time that he writes, which is very... So I want to hold him also in the group of options of the language in which we speak about God. And then And then he meets the traditional Jew, nachon? Who says, come on, Ingele, come back to the fold. Why are you searching outside the come to the God of revelation, of Sinai, of all the Sforim, of the books, of our tradition. That's the place that you should look for your faith, which maybe is something that some of us have done at some point. You know, that we've gone searching for this, in this God thirst, or in this God search. We went and somebody said, why don't you come back? Actually, we might have it here, but not Zeitlin. It's not enough for him. He's not that kind of a guy in a certain way. So what he goes on to, and we're not going to read it all, but what he goes into presenting, nachon, he presents the Jew, the Muslim, and the monk, nachon? And he presents them all as saying, but we know the answer. If you're searching, we know the answer. My answer is here, his answer is there. And then he speaks about the multitudes, right? The hamonim, which is another big question. This is not just the individual search. You come across the hamonim, the Muslim hamonim that say, come into the mosque, come, you know, in the dervish swirl. And first of all, I think it's kind of amazing that in 1910, he can place all the religions on the same pedestal and say, yeah, you know, we know what they're going to say already. We don't have to go. We know what they're going to say. Turn into the priest's zest, stand under the bell of the church, come do Shabbat with us, and we'll show you the beauty of Shabbat, right? Do it with the rabbi. So I think that what I found most enriching about his quest is when he stops all this and he says, enough of all you people that know all the time. It's like you've been knowing for thousands of years. It doesn't work for me, this knowledge, which seems to him to be, first of all, way too conformist, conforming, and normative. And he's saying, you're not helping me with the El Chai that I'm looking for, with the Chayei HaChaim that I'm looking for. And therefore, why? And I also thought that this was very helpful for me, is he's saying, I need acknowledgement of crisis. If there isn't acknowledgement of crisis, if your presentation of religion and of faith is so perfect, you know, plakatim, each religion has their plakat, they invite you in, you have an email on the bottom where to come and see it and how to learn it. He says, I need an entrance which first of all acknowledges the fact that there is crisis of faith, that faith is something that sometimes you have to be totally out of. Nachon? For me, I think these are the powerful words where he says, I mean, I'm going to read it from page number 9. I'm reading it in Hebrew. It's the second part of the first paragraph. Really, I would have put it in bold letters, where he says, "Va'ere et kol ha'ovrim v'shavim hamagidim li kol ele." And they have so much to say, נכון? והנה עוד לא הושברו את השבר הגדול. ועוד לא ידעו את התוגה הגדולה. They don't know yet the great melancholy of being in the religious crisis. טרם ידעו את התהום, וטרם יראו את השאול. את השטן לא ידעו, ואת האלוהים לא יכירו. Okay, נכון? That's kind of a daring sentence, because they haven't encountered Satan. They also don't know God. נכון? Because they're all the time offering the lit path in a certain way. And he's saying, יודעים הם אלוהים של שיטות. של שיטות, של דתות, של דברים. ואולם אינם יודעים אלוהים שאליו קוראים משעה שעובדים את הכל. ואני את הכל איבדתי. Okay, I know that state. I've lost it. I've lost all of that. And yet, and maybe that's what's so interesting about Zeitlin, that doesn't mean that God disappears. He's lost all firm ground. All these answers don't work for him. But he says, ואשמע קול קורא אליי מתהום הנצח בקשני נא. נכון? Seek seek me, look for me. But he has to do it now in a different way, because it's not going to work. It's not going to work in the other way. So first of all, I want to say that the acknowledgement of crisis in the presentation of what kind of faith track are we entering on is very important for me. First of all, I want to say it as a critique of New Age in certain aspects of New Age, because it's saying, no, don't say it's all in this lit arena that's all kind of glittering with light. No, that's not that type of path at all. It's a type of path that goes through the big crisis, through the abyss, through the places where we got torn up, and that isn't a place where you just throw yourself off the cliff. That's a place where if you stand quietly enough, you might hear actually the voice coming from the depths saying, now seek me. What is going to be your God now? It's not going to be the very presentable, marketable God of religion. And actually, these pieces might find some Jews, progressive or not, very angry. Like, he's really giving a bad reputation for our establishments. But he is. And if we wouldn't have people who, like Brenner and like Zeitlin, who stand up at some point, and even if they're annoying, they're standing there saying something very prophetic, and I think very important as well to say. Two more things that I want to say, if I do have time to say about Zeitlin, I do. Two more aspects that I want to highlight from this piece have to do with his definition of thirst as the path, okay? Because look, I'm reading from, maybe I'll read this part in English, just for why not, where he says on the bottom of page number 11, you see where there's 3 dots and it says, those people say. Okay? I want to look at that for a moment. He says, those people say God exists. God doesn't exist. God is alive. God is dead. Do they know what they're talking about? Lo, my soul thirsts for God. I am going to seek him. But even before I shall find him, I know him. I know what I lack. I know that for which my soul yearns. Even before I taste the water before me, before I know its nature, I well know that I'm thirsty. And even if the creek dries out, and even if all the springs dry out, my thirst will not be quenched. And even if I imagine to myself that that water is but an empty utterance, that the vision of the water is a mere mirage, even then my thirst shall not be quenched. Whether there be water in the world or not, which is an amazing statement, like whether there be God in the world or not, my thirst is certain. So first of all, if we looked at where Rabbi Nachman takes it, like go to the hindrances, he's saying stay with the sense of lack. That's a very important, powerful religious place to be in. Stay with the lack. I cannot assure you that you will find what you're looking for. But the fact that you are in a state of thirst, that yearning in itself is the state that he's looking for. I'll say something about that, another thing about that. And then he says, the thirst does not know is or is not. It knows only what is missing, and it shall go forth seeking it. Even if I listen to the babbling of mortals saying, there is no God, my thirst for him shall not be quenched. Right? If there is no God outside of me, why then he does exist in my thirst. Okay? So, Bichlal, to say, and I think this was Shraga Baron's article, was to say, let's think not in terms of believers and non-believers, of heretics and religious people, of faithful and the faithless. He says, if we look at Jewish literature, especially of the 20th century, around this area and in the revival of Hebrew literature, we actually find this big category of people that are tzmeim. They're God seekers. They say it very openly. The fact that they cannot find that God is another thing, but they're seeking. They're in the state of the seeking, and it means that they do not experience themselves as full, but they experience themselves as lacking, and that's the positive element that he sees. Now, in another big article that Zeitlin wrote later on, which was his big commentary on William James's, William James? Yeah, on the varieties of religious experience. It's called Hadat V'Giluyeha, which is a very famous piece of Zeitlin. He talks with James, and then he speaks about different ways in which, as humanity, we encounter the divine. And he says we encounter the divine in quiet, whispery moments of introspection, and that he has a whole slew of them. I can't remember. He has like 5 very positive ones in nature. Yeah, he speaks about all these forms, but one of them, and I think he doesn't say it here, but I think it's presented here. He says, we encounter God in our longing. Our ability as human beings to be longing is one of the major places where actually we encounter divinity, in the longing itself. So actually the longing becomes a very, very important kind of awakener to the sense of wherever it is on the path that we're looking for. Now, he does this, Zeitlin goes on, and I didn't bring the whole thing, it's huge, but he goes into the desert. He says, okay, enough of speaking to all these representatives of all these religions. I'm going into the desert, which is the place where Moses went, where Elijah went, where everybody goes, right? You go into Jesus goes, Muhammad goes, you seek God in the desert. And he has this wild vision in the desert of the souls that go up and they want to go into the Heichalot of God, and actually the big heretics, the souls of the big heretics are the ones that are very high. And if you ever studied Rav Kook, this will remind you immediately of Neshamot Tohu, these huge souls that are the souls of the big heretics, because they are the ones, and Zeitlin speaks very beautiful about it, they are the ones that are not willing to stop with just anything that's sold to them and say, oh, you're seeking here, this is a good God for you. And he says, no, these are really the wrestling souls. I mean, they might have come to the wrong thing, but they are the most interesting ones. So he kind of talks about it. And then he wakes up, he kind of gets in tune with Eastern religions. Mahoney gets it, and he goes up the mountain, and it's trying to teach him nirvana in this kind of Schopenhauer language, and he decides he's not going to stay on the top of the Eastern religion mountains. And the end of this vision of the heart is Zeitlin coming down the mountain, which is of course Nietzsche, and it's of course Moshe, and it's a beautiful story. But this Toeh, this wanderer, comes down from the mountain. And when he comes down from the mountain, that's page number 12, and I think it's bemet wonderful. He says, you see it's like the 5th, 6th line, and I was lost in a great plain. Okay, this is after he comes down from the mountain, he says. This is the end of the essay. I was lost in a great plain and sunk into profound thought, and I conversed with my soul. And by the way, in his book, Sifran Shel Yechidim, we have a lot of conversations of Zeitlin with his soul. What did I say to my soul? What did my soul say to me? What did I say to her? Beautiful stuff, and that is going to be translated in Art's translation. And I actually think that in kind of cultivating in congregation or with students this kind of language of faith as process, these wonderful dialogues with your heart or with your soul are a wonderful tool to kind of hear all that inner music, that we have about it. But he says the following, he says, I converse with my soul. What is the name of your God that you seek? And the soul answers, right? Names are but void. I know no name for my God. I know not his definition or boundaries. And then he goes on, he says, what did the mountains tell you? Only that which I seek. And what seek you? I know not its name yet, okay? Which is so important for us, think of it. Finding the name for it. And he says, and what do human beings call it? Wonder. עכשיו מדהים, נכון? 1910, radical amazement, wonder, the ability to say, pele, pele. I am seeking for what will not be contained because it has in it the element of pele. It's nifla mimeni. I want the aspect of the world of faith that I'm looking for to be one that has in it the me and the ele, like the Zohar says. It has in it the place of wonderment and not only the place of translation. So I'm staying in the language of faith. And what are the ways to your pele, right? To your wonder? What path leads to it? I know not yet. Let's go looking for it. Now let's go see. So, first of all, I think it's kind of courageous to present this kind of story without the Hollywood version, which is that you have to find something in the end. You have to get there, you have to get to the promised land, you have to find the treasure. I think there's something very wonderful about the fact that he can leave us and close, this is the end of Tzimaon, of thirst, leave us in the place that says, no, I've gone through the desert, I've spoken with them, I am going to continue the life of seeking. I'm not gonna let myself give up because I can't find. My life will be the life of seeking. It's gonna be very critical, because you see how critical he is. You know, you could understand why he and Brenner had this kind of language together, but he says, I am totally knowing that I want God, I need God, I'm going to find God, but I'm going to continue searching. So let's go searching. And that's what he's leaving off with as an invitation. So I wanted to bring this translation of Zeitlin, first of all, because I think it's a wonderful text. It's dramatic, melodramatic, it's so artistic and artful, and it's so interesting for me to think, who are the other people that you meet on your way today? And I was thinking, first of all, it would be very interesting to imagine how you would describe the Buddhist person you met. Because this would not be what you would meet today if you'd be talking to an American. It would not be just the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jew. I think actually the place where we would be looking to have that seeking of faith, you know, people would go, they'd meet a Native American Zen, they'd meet, you can actually make up all the chapters that we don't have here. I think it would be a wonderful thing to do. But you'd meet the Buddhist and you'd meet the Hindu from the ashram and you'd meet the person, and you'd be wary because you went with Zeitlin through that wonderful description where he says, look at all those grays and grays, all these great ideas that people come up with, all these idealisms and isms and the soul of the world and the you know, each ashram has a different name for it, maybe each synagogue. But he's saying they die. In the end, they kind of lose out, and I'm looking for something else. So I, first of all, had this whole crew, you know, like Admiel Kostman says, right? The holy crew, like the whole crew of these other people you meet. But I think that if I'm thinking of young seekers, there's something so encouraging about saying it's okay if you don't feel good in all these established concepts. Go, look, try and find it. Not to be so frightened that you just want to hold on to them, but to let them go. So that's for Zeitlin. And Zeitlin continued after these years, and after he became much more observant, or back into observance. First of all, he went through years of intense revelations and prophetic writings that came about through his experiences of the first years of the First World War. I mean, those are very peak years in his experience. And he has, also after the war, he has this intense knowledge, kind of mystical knowledge, that the world is going into total darkness. And into that total darkness that it's going to, he must turn to all the nations and awaken them to see why peace is important. So he has the letter to the Poles, and the letter to the Americans, and the letter to the Russians, which are all quite amazing kind of ideas of a very kind of blazing mind. But also, these are the years when Zeitlin starts collecting, or starts a call for people who will create a spiritual community of people who will be praying for the world, which I think we should actually have back again. I mean, not that he succeeded, by the way. Okay, here's Zeitlin in these years, writing in all newspapers, starting to translate the Zohar into Hebrew, writing all these amazing things that he's writing about. But he's saying we must find a way that people who are very daring and who work on the subtle plane, and not Shomer HaTzair with what they'll be doing, or with what the Bundes will be doing, or with what other people are going to be very activist doing in the world. He says we also need people who will be working on that subtle realm and praying, meditating for the world, meditating. And he has this call out that he sends out in Zoharic Aramaic, bad marketing, to be burnt. 1942, Nachon, he goes out, I think it was Rosh Hashanah, with a Zohar and with his tefillin. He's a very old man by then. And I'm thinking, we're reading this in 1910. And actually, that's the image that we have of Zeitlin, Nachon, walking to the trains. Where was his God then? Was there some kind of presence for him? And that's why I really chose to go immediately to Piaseczna, to Kalman Klanimus Shapiro, because we know him mostly. Kalman Klanimus Shapiro is page number 7. Okay. Both of them are really people that belong to the idea called Chasidut shel Atid Lavo. That was Zeitlin's phrasing. But these are radical neo kind of Hasidim, meaning what? That both of them come from Hasidic backgrounds. Both of them totally are lit by the essence of the Hasidic message in a certain way, or Hasidic worldview, and both of them have acute criticism of what happened to the Hasidic movement. That it's so schwach, everybody's busy doing their lineages, everybody's busy doing their ritualistic aspects of what kind of hat do these wear and what kind of shoes do these wear, and they hate it. And they feel this stifling stagnation of the Hasidic movement, and that's why they're called forth to say we must find a way of reigniting. It's actually a reformist movement. They're reforming the Hasidic language, which says we must reignite the passion. We must reignite the real living or lived sense of the presence of divinity in the world, because what they're noticing in their generation is that in the Hasidic courts, everybody's using this language, but it actually is flat. By now, it's flat. It's fallen asleep. And they know that there's something alive in it, and they want to wake it up. So when we're talking here about Kalman Klanimus Shapiro, we are not talking about Kalman Klanamis Shapiro of, Holy Fire, that Nehemiah Polin wrote this beautiful book about, because actually that's the way that most of the people I know and myself encountered Kalman Klanamis through the book Esh Kodesh, which are the collection of the Torah that he said and then edited actually in Warsaw Ghetto from 1939 till 1942, Parashot HaShavua and the Chagim and his journey of faith inside the ghetto, trying to find a way not to keep people physically alive, but trying to keep people spiritual alive, so that they feel that there is presence. And we're not going to do that. That's not our subject. But I want to say that's a very important testimony about the world of faith and losing faith in Esh Kodesh. But I'm not choosing to do that one at this time. I want to dafka go back to the book that he wrote before. Yeah, he wrote in 1920. He is a young, cool Admor. Okay, he's an Admor of Piaseczna outside of Warsaw. He's big on education. He's big on spiritual education, using all these modes and practices of trying to revive this new mode of Hasidut that he feels is dying out. And he says we have to do it with the youth. And he comes out with this book, this tiny little kuntres called Bnei Machshava Tova. Okay? Bnei Machshava Tova, you can buy it for 10 shekels anywhere, which was beautifully translated by Andrea Cohen-Keener into English, which is more readable English than the Hebrew of the Hebrew, and it's called Conscious Community. Conscious Community, a Guide to Inner Work. Now, Andrea was faithful to the language of Bnei Machshava Tova, but she was also very faithful to choosing that whenever a word could be kind of a dead idiom or a traditional one, or could be a spiritual one, she chose the latter, okay? So when you read it in English, you're like, was this written yesterday? But it's not because she was flimsy about her translation. I mean, I've really worked with it, so I know. But Conscious Community is a guide, how to create a spiritual community that seeks the life of presence of faith, kind of burning brightly faith. How do you do that? And from speaking with some people here, people use it in their communities because it is such an amazing book, and it's very Hasidic, and it's very good for rabbis who have in their communities people that want more, that want a more intense community. These are the guides to how to create that community. And when he wrote it, it wasn't allowed to be disseminated openly. You had to find the people that you really think fit the bill, and then you were supposed to give them to read it. And even, by the way, after the Holocaust, when they were thinking about publishing it here, there was a big argument if it should be published or not, because it started off as something very esoteric. This is for an elite. It's supposed to be for people who desire it. It's not shunning the people who are not, but it's for this group. Now, what I wanted to bring from it, speaking about faith, is I wanted to bring the statement in 14, right? He says, the first part is totally Hasidic, Bastian language. Baruch Atta, Adonai, Elohaynu, Melech Haolam, and it's like jokes in Hasidim. You don't have to continue. That's totally enough. It's like, can you have that as your experience? Atta, Melech Haolam. Can you experience those words not just as the formulaic way that you start a blessing? So no, forget about this is what we're talking about. Baruch, Atta. My mother would always say, Atta is enough. I don't have to continue. Atta, Atta. But he says, do that, meditate on it, practice it. And the part that I thought is so wonderful in 14 is where he says, yeah, actually faith is a practice. And I want to suggest that people who find it difficult to work with this practice on their emotional imagination level, okay, or parts of their psyche, I'm also offering a meditation that has reason in it, okay? But he starts off with it that way. He says, in 14, he says, before this ability to see the world as souls, essences, and consciousness, that's Baal Shemtov, right? That the whole world is otiyot, neshamot, but he says before you get to that level, you can still impress upon your rational mind the following thought. The whole world and everything in it is divine in origin and substance. It is not visible to my eyes, but God is the source of all reality. Even I am full of God. The sand under my feet is an articulation of God. The whole world is utterly comprised of and dependent on God. עכשיו, קודם כל, think of it. You'd say, okay, why don't we just take him to a psychiatrist? Or like, you know, when you get... לא, זה לא פשוט. נכון? Because we have to say, where do you place this language that actually it works? It has to be within a surrounding that upholds this as a value, because if not, you're like on, you're like on hallucinogenic mushrooms, like everything's... But actually, that's another way of getting to that state of faith also. But he's saying here, you know, you have to think about it. You have to cultivate it. It's not actually something that necessarily starts with experience and then you give it words. No, you have to cultivate your ability to say, instead of a statement, God is in everything, to say, is God in everything? God is in the sand I'm walking on. It's these grains. So it's something to be cultivated and to be held within a sane ability to still be able to make coffee. You know, when you're in that state, you can be. Zeitlin writes very beautifully. He says, when I go into states that are too, you know, panentheistic like that, where just everything is God, it's very difficult for him to come back, okay? And it's not easy to be active in society. So I think here he's saying, yeah, but you know, if we want an intensely spiritual group, we are going to practice and we're going to go around with this. And then he says, and you have to impress on your mind this idea that now I, of my own free will, have come to think of myself as a free and independent agent. Like I have cut myself off this unity, off this oneness. It's a statement about the ego. He says, think to yourself when you feel yourself so separate and everything is about me and them, it, God, think to yourself, I, of my own free will, have created an I sense that is a separating sense, nachon? It's really kind of the language of bitul, of the Baal Shem Tov again, but just in different garb. But he says, I've come to think of myself as a free and independent agent. I have exiled myself, you know, anochi lo yadad. Because of this anochi, because of this sense of the I have exiled myself from the sense of the presence of God. And then he has this beautiful, very pedagogic bit where he says, look, it's not going to work all the time, which I think is the yofi. It's not going to work. It's not going, but this is going to be your practice. If you want to be an Archiv Raya, this is what we're trying to practice. We're trying to awaken a new sensibility. So he says, I'm just going on. He says, when you constantly impress this, how it will come about. And then he says, the soul sees and knows in just this way, but the body is an obstacle to such a perception. And I would immediately invite him to see what Rabbi Nachman says about that obstacle, because I think that's filled with divinity itself. And then he says, when you predispose your body to the perspective of the soul, she will naturally emerge and state her point of view. And then he says, you may not always carry this perspective, you know. I hope we have a few moments of this in our life, but you will certainly experience many fine moments of understanding. And our sages have taught that 1 hour of knowing God in this world is more valuable than the eternity in paradise. So I'm bringing this, first of all, because I think we should have our own kind of guides that we write in the language that we might find relevant in our communities. And he's doing it very, very systematically. Very different than Zeitlin, who writes this kind of grand language. Piaseczna, the Admor of Piaseczna, really has a way of saying, no, it's practice. So this is the way we're going to talk, and this is the way we're going to work out the community, and this is the way we're going to greet each other, and we're going to do things to make us very, very mindful. Like, how do you create that kind of mindful community where the presence of faith is of that order? And again, when you look at his statements in Warsaw Ghetto, trying to just keep that flame alive, right? Because he has this strong sense that it's not where was God in the Holocaust, but what is happening to God in the right? It's happening to God. The war is happening to God. That's his sense. And he really develops a theology which is trying to find language that will work for a person in the dire straits of being in the ghetto, to find a way that the emunah can flicker, because it can leave you, even though he says it's going to leave you in a state where you can just be in the chamber of God, weeping with God. But it means that that's his mesima, his goal is to find a way that the language of faith can remain. And by the way, that's why I think he's so amazing, that that's his mission, that the mission isn't on good days. It's like the Slonimer Rebbe says, emunatcha balelot. You know, during the day and when everything is fine and dandy, ze lo ba'ya to be filled with faith. But what do you do in the lelot? Emunatcha is for the lelot. It's when you're walking in the darkness and you can't see the step ahead of you. That's the time that faith has to, that's when cultivating the inner life matters, because that's when you really need to use it. So it's the Laila people that developing that sense of emunah in the Laila. So very little time. I want to look with you for a moment at 2 poems on page number 5, and then jump to the end of the Choveret. First of all, I want to say that I really feel that women poets, I don't know, I'm sure maybe also in America, but clearly in Israel, I think they're the big carriers of a very wonderful, subtle language around emunah. And I wanted to bring two poems that have in them something very special, which is that you cannot easily differentiate when she is talking about the presence or lack of presence, or faith or lack of faith, if she's turning to a lover, to a human lover, yeah? Or if she's turning to God. And I would say, as my friend Zvika Mark says here, that it's very clear, though, that when you think of Zelda, who's such, Zelda comes from the Schneerson family. She is Chabad. Okay, she comes from Chabad family. She lives in Mea Shearim, and on the other hand, she's a totally free, gushing, fiery soul. And so when she speaks of Atta, like your first take should be God, and then maybe your second take should be a man. When you're reading Leah Goldberg, for sure, I would say first and foremost, there's the other, the lover, the romantic or erotic lover, and then that gets transpersonalized to a question of emunah. First of all, us Israelis know it because it's put into beautiful music, this shir. But I want to pick out of it, also written after the Second World War. Okay, she says, "Lemi she'ino ma'amin kashe lichiyot hashana. Hasadot mevakshim bracha. Hayam mevakesh emunah, ve'ata incha mevakesh davar. Libi yashen et shnato, ve'ani yeshena. חלומי כבד שתיקה ומתי מהלכים בשנתי כבתוך מצודה עתיקה. איך אתעורר משנתי ואין בליבי אמונה. ואתה אינך מבקש דבר." So first of all, here we do have the state where it's not ani yeshena v'libi er or ani era v'libi er, but I'm asleep and my heart is asleep and I have no faith. And how will I wake up with no faith in my heart and the horror visions of all the people I know that are dead are walking around in my nightmares, nachon? Kilu. And then you think, okay, so who's this Atta? Atta incha mevakesh davar. Who's she talking to? Yitzchak Soneh? Like, immediately you think of all the guys that you think, who is she talking to? But on the other hand, the statement that I found interesting to bring here is that ability of Leah Goldberg to say, look at this world. Everything is seeking that sense of trust, of faith. Hasadot מבקשים ברכה. הים מבקש אמונה. נכון? אמונה, that it will continue, that we will be alive, ואתה אינך מבקש דבר. But when Zelda writes, look at this, he says, הסתרת פניך ממני, ולא היה בי עוד כל הנהר המלא, העולה על גדותיו. נותקו חיי מזמר, ואעמוד בכוך נכלמת, בלי שמש, בלי ירח, ובלי נר. הסתרת את נפשך ממני, והלחם שעל השולחן יבש ויהי ניקודים, ויהי ניקודים. כן? My life has been severed from song. So, severed from song, standing in the cleft, confounded. No sun, no moon, no candle. Again, who's she talking about? What is that state where we've lost the sense of the trickling, water in the river? The thirst doesn't find its answer. Something is dried, the river, it's dried up. But that's another of the places where we have to stop in the voyage or in the journey of emunah. Okay? That's one of the places you'll be. You'll be in that place. So to end, I'm not going to do the other Rabbi Nachman's. I brought Sachki because I just thought I have to bring Chernichovsky in. We're not going to be doing it, but I just think, wow, look at this other language of faith, faith in man, faith in love, faith in friendship, in a poem that was so beloved that it was almost chosen to be the anthem. It's all about that other twist around emunah. But I just want to do the last page, which is page number 16. Okay, here's Zelda in one of her most amazing poems, and it's in this book that Marcia Falk translated the bilingual edition of Zelda called The Spectacular Difference, and if you don't have it, run and get it. And she says, Ani tzipor meta, tzipor achat shemeta. I am a dead bird, one bird that has died. ציפור אותה מעיל אפור, בלכתי לץ מפתיר לעומתי. Yeah, a bird cloaked in a gray coat, a scoffer mocks me as I walk. פתע אפפתני שתיקתך, חי העולמים. Suddenly, your silence envelops me, O ever-living one. בשוק שוקק, עוף מת ישיר, רק אתה קיים. בשוק שוקק, מדדה ציפור עם שיר נסתר. Right? In a teeming market, a dead fowl sings, only you exist. And in a teeming market, a bird, נכון, that's Zelda, a bird hobbles with a new hidden song, And that's the moment where that faith is renewed, that sense of aliveness of Chai HaOlamim. So I want us to end with the Torah of Menachem Nachum of Chernobyl, a student of the Baal Shemtov and of the Magid. I also think Paul Espress put out his writing of Maor Einaim in English. Oh, yeah, just Bereshit, thanks. Well, this is not in that, because this is Yitro. But I want to bring it because I think that in taking everything that we've looked around at as the journey of practice as faith, he brings it to a beautiful place where he says, the truth is that human beings cannot stay on one level, for the vitality moves to and fro. Achayut, ratzo, vashov. It comes and it goes. These are not stable states. Faith is not a stable state. It comes and it goes. And how shall one come to God? Blessed be he, if one has fallen from one's level, for his consciousness and intellect have been taken away from him. But one should think, here's his practice, that God, the Holy Blessed One, is Mellow kol haaretz kvodo. Okay, we're back to the Baal Shem Tov. That even in a place that is kol haaretz, that is all earth, that is totally earthly, and is only crude material, even so, it is filled with God's glory. Okay, he says, he makes a drash dafka on the Mellow kol haaretz, hachomer, hagasut, everything that we think of as not God. No, it's dafka Mellow kol haaretz kvodo. And then he says, God, the Holy Blessed One, is called Chayei HaOlamim. Chai HaOlamim. Yeah, that's what Zelda is saying. Chai HaOlamim. Life of all life. Meaning that all life in the world, beasts, animals, birds, human beings, their life force is God. And this is the meaning of the life of all life, that God is the vitality of all that is alive. And his practice for one who has fallen, he says, and when you, right, when your spirit falls to the depth of despair, one must think, why? I am alive. Okay? Or aren't I alive? That's another way. Halo, ani chai. Halo, ani chai. Chai ani. And who is this aliveness that I am? Okay, just like Piaseczna takes us through, make a practice for yourself. So when this is happening to you, who is this aliveness that I am? By the way, this is very much like Ramana Maharshi. It's the same kind of go with your quest, go backtrack, try and take off the shells. He says, so who is this aliveness that I am? Is it not the Holy Blessed One? And we find that even here, there is also the Holy Blessed One, but in extremely contracted, yeah? So I just want to take his meditation and end with it because I love David Zeller's, this was David Zeller, who was a wonderful teacher here. Bill told me he invited him 10 times to the synagogue in Arizona. But David was a wonderful Jewish meditation teacher, wonderful spiritual seeker. And I think this was his favorite Torah in the world. And it's also for his memory. But the idea of the practice of faith, which is, here I am, down and out. And then I can contemplate and say, Halo chayani. Halo chayani. And if I am alive, what is this aliveness that I am? It must be that that's God. So I'd love us to end with singing this. I'm sure most of you know it. And let's sing it. I am alive. I am alive. I am alive. I'm alive. I am alive. I am alive. I am alive. I'm alive. And who is this aliveness? This I am. And who is this aliveness? This I am. And who is this aliveness? This I am. It's the one, the holy, blessed one. Yeah, I am alive. I am alive. I am alive. I'm alive. And who is this aliveness? This I am. And who is this aliveness? This I am. And who is this aliveness? This I am. But the one, the holy, blessed one.